Hello, students. I'm coming to you with the next video lecture on Chapter 4, which covers quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods of inquiry. In this video lecture, we will cover the following topics: objectivity versus subjectivity, quantitative versus qualitative methods, mixed methods of inquiry, types of mixed methods designs, 3 basic mixed methods designs, 3 advanced mixed methods designs, and finally, reasons for using mixed methods. In terms of learning objectives, by the end of this video lecture, you should be able to discuss the role of objectivity and subjectivity in qualitative and quantitative scientific inquiries, differentiate qualitative and quantitative methods and their purposes, define mixed methods of inquiry and the various types of mixed methods designs, identify and describe 3 basic mixed methods designs, identify and describe 3 advanced mixed methods designs, and finally, identify the reasons for using mixed methods designs. So we are now at the end of unit number 1. We've covered chapters 1, 2, and 3, and in this video, we will cover chapter 4, which again focuses on quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods of inquiry. So let's begin by discussing the differences between objectivity and subjectivity in scientific inquiry. So I really like this cartoon here because I think it helps to convey the differences between objective and subjective approaches to research. So we know that objective approaches to research are more associated with quantitative methods, while more subjective approaches to research are associated with qualitative methods. However, the two, although they are standalone methods, really are complementary and go hand in hand. So as we can see on the left-hand side, it says, I've done a test and therefore have objective proof of my project skills. And on the right-hand side, we see where it says exactly, which is why we need to go beyond knowledge. So let's discuss your experience across the projects you have managed recently. So in other words, although objective approaches to research have their merit and they are valuable, they are limited in that they can help us to understand the what, but they can't help us to understand the why. In other words, subjective forms of research help us to go in depth in our understanding of the human experience. So the limitations of one method or the weaknesses of one method are made up for in the other method. So in terms of definitions, objectivity is really about observations of reality that are ideally not influenced by the content of one's own mind. And I really emphasize this word ideally because we know that at the end of the day that research really is a human endeavor. And so for that reason, there's always the potential for biases to creep into the research process. However, if we are approaching our research from an objective standpoint, it is our responsibility as the researcher to minimize these biases as much as possible. The focus in objectivity is really about what is factual, measurable, and readily observable through the 5 senses. On the other hand, within subjective approaches to research, it is about observations of reality that are influenced by the content of one's own mind. And so within subjective approaches, it is acknowledged that human biases are a part of the research process. However, it is the responsibility of the researcher to be very transparent about what their biases are, because those biases can and will influence the research process and how they interpret the data. The focus within subjective approaches to research are really on lived experiences, feelings, interpretations, points of view, and opinions. Now let's discuss the difference between quantitative and qualitative methods. So quantitative research methods emphasize the production of precise and generalizable statistical findings. So within quantitative research, it's really about breadth. We really want to try to capture as many cases and individuals as possible. And sometimes in quantitative research, there are tens of thousands of cases of individuals that are sampled within this kind of research. And so it's really about trying to capture as many cases as possible, because the larger our sample size, the more accurate our generalizations. However, what we'll talk about a little bit later on in the semester is that the size of our sample and how we go about sampling, like in particular, the sampling methods that we employ really do have a bearing on the accuracy of the generalizations that we make. And so we do have to take these things into consideration. But overall, the idea within quantitative research is to generalize, and we typically study samples in quantitative research because it's often not feasible to study entire populations. And so the sample that we draw ideally needs to be as representative of the larger population as possible. The more representative, the more accurate our generalizations will be. In quantitative research, the researchers typically formulate all or most of the research procedures in advance and attempt to adhere precisely to these procedures with maximum objectivity as data are collected. So the procedures within quantitative research are typically specified very early on in the process by the researcher. And these are things such as any theoretical frameworks that will be employed, the hypotheses that will be generated based on those theoretical frameworks, the variables that will be studied, as well as how those variables will be measured or captured. So these are all things that researchers have to consider and think about and specify in advance of data collection. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that these things cannot or will not change, but typically the way the process unfolds within quantitative research is that most things are front-loaded and specified well in advance of data collection. Quantitative research methods are more likely to tap deeper meanings of human experience and generate theoretically richer observations, not easily reduced to numbers. So I mentioned previously that quantitative research is really about breadth and trying to cast as wide of a net as possible. Well, qualitative research is really about depth. And so we really don't care about the size of our sample, nor do we care about, well, we care about the size of our sample, but typically the sample size within qualitative research is a lot smaller than it is within quantitative. So we do care about the size of the sample, but it doesn't have to be in the tens of thousands of cases as is the case with quantitative research. It's just not possible to go in depth with that many cases. And so sample sizes are typically much, much smaller in qualitative research. And also generalizability is typically not the goal in qualitative research either, because we are seeking smaller sample sizes and we are trying to go in depth in our understanding of human experiences and phenomena. So generalizability is not an issue in qualitative research. And also, the in-depth work that we typically do in qualitative research is so rich that it is often the seed for theory development, because theories really help us to understand human behavior, and qualitative research is designed in such a way that allows us to glean these deeper and richer and more in-depth understandings of the human experience that feeds very well into the development of theoretical frameworks. In qualitative research, the researchers typically begin with a more flexible plan, one that allows the research procedures to evolve as observations are gathered. And so it's not uncommon within qualitative research for the procedures to evolve and change throughout the process. The research process within qualitative endeavors is much more flexible and is much more likely to change as the process unfolds. So I know that we talked about deductive and inductive reasoning in the last video lecture, but I wanted to bring these concepts up again as we talk about the differences between quantitative and qualitative methods. And so we typically associate deductive reasoning with quantitative research, and this is more of a top-down kind of approach, where we specify our theoretical frameworks if the study does have a theory, and we did talk about in the last lecture that some studies are atheoretical. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that the findings that are generated from those studies are any less valuable. But some studies choose to employ a theoretical framework and others don't. But for those that do, we typically start with a theory and we formulate our hypotheses on the basis of that theory. We collect our data, we make our observations, and then we decide whether the observations that we've made either confirm or disconfirm our hypotheses and our theory. So this is more of a top-down deductive approach, which is entirely different than a more inductive, qualitative, bottom-up kind of approach, where we don't come into the research process in qualitative studies that employ inductive approaches. We don't come into the study with these preconceived notions about theory and hypotheses. We make our observations, we collect our data, and we allow the data to speak to us. And within that data, we look for patterns, and we allow those patterns to inform the tentative hypotheses that we develop. And from there, we begin to work our way toward theory development. But the idea within inductive approaches is that we come in as a blank slate, ideally, and we allow our participants' voices to speak to us, and the hypotheses that we generate are grounded in the data that we collect. So it's not based on our preconceived notions or ideas about theories and hypotheses. It's really grounded in our observations and the patterns that we observe in the data. That is what informs the development of our hypotheses and our theory. So this is why it's more of a bottom-up approach with inductive qualitative studies. Now let's talk a little bit about connecting research methods to study purpose. So whether we emphasize qualitative or quantitative research methods in a particular study depends on the purpose of our study. So qualitative research is most appropriate when we seek to gain deeper insight into subjective meanings of complex phenomena. So this is really about gaining deeper insight and meaning. So if this is what we seek to do, then we are going to lean more on qualitative research methods. On the other hand, quantitative research is most appropriate when we seek to test or confirm hypotheses, or test or confirm theories, or identify statistical correlational relationships, or when we seek to generalize precise objective findings to a larger population. So if these are some of the things that we are seeking to do, then we're going to lean more on quantitative research methods. And here's an example. So on the left-hand side, we see that for a more qualitative purpose statement, it might be something like, the purpose of this study is to explore the lived experiences of homeless youth in Waco. So if this is our purpose, we're trying to seek to understand what it's like to be homeless in Waco. If this is what we're seeking to do, this is more of a qualitative purpose to our study. On the other hand, on the right-hand side, we see a quantitative purpose statement, which reads, the purpose of this study is to investigate the factors that are associated with homelessness among youth in Waco. So as you can see in this purpose statement, we're not seeking to understand lived experiences or what it's like to be homeless. What we're really seeking to do is understand associations, right, between these factors, these statistical associations between these factors and homelessness among youth in Waco. So these are two completely different purpose statements. Now let's talk about connecting research methods to research questions. So researchers need to match their research methods to their research questions as well, using quantitative methods for some studies and qualitative methods for others. So if your research question is something like, how do youth in Waco describe their experiences with homelessness? This is more of a qualitative research question. On the other hand, if your question is, what are the factors associated with homelessness among youth in Waco? This is more of a quantitative research question, because again, we're seeking to understand those factors that are statistically associated with homelessness. Now let's talk a little bit more about quantitative methods in terms of purpose, research designs, and data collection methods. So again, the purpose within quantitative methods is to emphasize objective measurements and the statistical, mathematical, or numerical analysis of data. Typically within quantitative methods, we are employing closed-ended questions and seeking responses to those closed-ended questions from our participants. Data are usually collected in the form of numbers, counts, and measures of things. Some of the more popular research designs or methodologies, which we'll talk about later on in the semester, that are associated with quantitative methods includes experimental designs, quasi-experimental designs, single case designs, and survey research designs. And some of the more common data collection methods are things such as questionnaires or surveys. In terms of qualitative methods, the purpose, again, of qualitative methods is to emphasize subjective participant experiences and how they make meaning or sense of their perceived realities. The goal here is to gain in-depth understanding of a research problem that goes beyond numerical data, as mentioned previously. And then typically within qualitative methods, we are asking more open-ended questions that allow for exploration of a topic, and data are typically collected in the form of words, pictures, descriptions, or narratives. Some of the more common research designs or methodologies employed within qualitative methods include ethnography, case study, phenomenology, grounded theory, life history, and narrative inquiry. And we'll talk more about these later in the semester as well. Some of the more qualitative data collection methods include individual interviews, as well as focus groups, direct behavioral participant observations, examination of documents, and audiovisual material. Here's a table that I pulled from your text that I think does a good job of helping to contrast some of the attributes that are common in quantitative in comparison to qualitative methods. So you can take a look at this table and examine it in your own time. Now let's talk about mixed methods of inquiry. Mixed methods research refers to the use of a combination of quantitative and qualitative research methods within the same study. So that's the key, is that both of these methods are happening within the same study. But it is not enough to simply use both qualitative and quantitative data. The researchers must also integrate them at one or more stages of the research process to improve understanding of the phenomena being investigated and to strengthen the study. So it is thought that by employing both methods, and not just employing both methods, but integrating them, it helps to give a more complete picture or a more in-depth understanding of a phenomenon. It helps to strengthen the study. Because as I mentioned previously, the limitations of one method are made up by the other method. So when we bring the two methods together, it makes for a stronger study. Mixed methods is a standalone method unto itself. So just like quantitative methods is a standalone method and qualitative methods is a standalone method, mixed methods is also its own method as well. So your text talks about 9 different types of mixed methods designs that vary according to whether qualitative or quantitative methods are emphasized and the time sequence in which each method is implemented. So there are tons of possibilities, right? So there are possibilities regarding emphasis, specifically where qualitative methods might be emphasized in the study, or other mixed method studies might emphasize quantitative methods, or still in other studies, there might be equal emphasis on both quantitative and qualitative methods. There's also a range of possibilities regarding sequencing and implementation. So specifically, some studies might collect qualitative data and utilize qualitative methods first. So qualitative methods might be implemented first. And in other studies, quantitative methods might be implemented first. And still in other studies, both methods might be implemented simultaneously. So here's a table that lays out all of the 9 types of mixed methods designs that are mentioned in your text. And so for example, you see under the heading that says qualitative emphasis, you see that the first notation there suggests that qualitative is the dominant method, right? Because it's in all caps. So anytime that you see all caps, that means that that particular method is dominant in that design. So in this case, what that first notation is saying is that qualitative methods are emphasized and they were implemented first, okay? And then under the heading moving down here where it says quantitative emphasis, in the first notation there, you see that quantitative is in caps. And it was, so that meaning that quantitative methods were emphasized first, were emphasized overall in the study. Quantitative methods were emphasized and they came first in the design, Okay, so that's what that first notation is saying. Quantitative methods are dominant because it's in all caps, and they were implemented first in the design. And then going down here to the bottom under the heading that says equal emphasis, we see that in that first notation that there's no emphasis on either method. Both have equal emphasis in the study. However, in the first notation there, qualitative was implemented first. So yes, both methods have equal emphasis, but qualitative methods were implemented first, followed by quantitative. So you can take a look at this table in your own time and just kind of familiarize yourself with all the different types of mixed methods designs. But again, anytime you see caps, like where every single letter in the word is capitalized, that means that that is the dominant method in the design. If you don't see any caps at all, it means equal emphasis. So although there are 9 different types of designs that are mentioned in your text, these are the 3 that I really want to hone in on. And that is convergent mixed methods, exploratory sequential mixed methods, and explanatory sequential mixed methods. So in convergent mixed methods, essentially both quantitative and qualitative data are collected concurrently and then analyzed separately. In exploratory sequential mixed methods, qualitative data are collected first and provide a basis for formulating the quantitative phase of the study. So qualitative methods come first in exploratory sequential mixed methods designs. And so the key word here is sequential, right? So meaning that one method is followed by another method. And then finally, explanatory sequential mixed methods designs is where quantitative data are collected first and then qualitative data. And the aim is to develop a better understanding of quantitative data. So we collect qualitative data to help us to explain the numbers. And so this last design here, explanatory sequential mixed methods, is the design that I typically lean on in my own work because I'm more of a quantitatively trained researcher. However, given the population that I typically study, which is non-resident African-American fathers, even though I'm more quantitatively trained, I realize how important it is to collect qualitative data, especially with this population, because the numbers are not always in their favor. And so very early on in my work, I realized how important it is to not only just collect quantitative data, but to also, even if qualitative methods are not emphasized in my design, I always make an effort to collect some qualitative data to provide context. I've learned that decontextualized data often doesn't bode well for marginalized populations, including non-resident African-American fathers. I am a huge believer in the fact that the numbers are often not in favor of oppressed populations. And so it's very important to contextualize those numbers. Dealing with numbers in a decontextualized manner can be very dangerous and harmful. And so I really, despite my quantitative training, always endeavor to include some qualitative research and data collection, even if I have to bring someone else onto the team that's more qualitatively trained. That's something that I'm willing to do, so long as I'm able to provide the fairest and most complete picture of my participants. And so here are some visuals here that can help you to understand the differences between these 3 basic methods that you can take a look at in your own time. Here's an example of a visual that I created for an explanatory sequential mixed method study that I have conducted in the past. And the blue circles there are the points at which I integrated the data. As I mentioned previously, it's not just about collecting quantitative and qualitative data or employing quantitative and qualitative methods. What makes a study truly mixed methods is the integration of the 2 methods together and the way in which you go about integrating that data. That is what makes for a true mixed methods design. And so these 3 blue circles here show the points at which I mixed the data, which was at the beginning of the research process, in the middle, and at the end. And so in the beginning, I mixed the 2 methods by writing a purpose statement for my study that was reflective of both quantitative and qualitative methods, and also posing both quantitative research questions as well as qualitative research questions. And so I started with quantitative data collection and analysis. And once I got my quantitative results back, I used those results to help guide me in the formulation of the questions that I would ask my participants in qualitative interviews. So that second blue circle there reflects that process of collecting the quantitative data and using the findings from the quantitative in order to develop the qualitative phase, in order to develop the questions that I would ask my participants in interviews. And so that's that second circle, blue circle there. And then the last blue circle is once I collected my qualitative data and I completed my interviews with my participants, I also integrated the two methods in my write-up of the results. And so I wrote up my quantitative results, and then I used what I found in the qualitative interviews to explain my quantitative findings. And so I integrated the two methods at the stage of results and interpretation as well. So there were 3 points at which I integrated. In the beginning, in the development of my purpose statement and research questions, in the middle, in the development of my interview guide that I would use to interview my participants, and at the end, in the process of writing up the results. So those were the 3 points at which I mixed or integrated the two methods. And so again, as I mentioned, the key to a true and sound and robust and rigorous mixed method study is the points of integration and how you integrate the two. A study is not truly mixed methods if it doesn't truly integrate the data. And then here are 3 advanced mixed methods designs. And I have to be honest with you in saying that although your text talks about these 3 designs, I'm not as familiar with these as I am with the 3 basic designs. So my training in mixed methods research is much more based on the 3 basic methods, but I still wanted you to be aware of the 3 advanced mixed methods as well. And so the intervention mixed methods is really about merging qualitative inquiry with quantitative evaluation of an intervention's outcomes. And so basically, the way in which this method could potentially be employed in practice is that when you are evaluating the effectiveness of an intervention, typically interventions are evaluated quantitatively, where you might collect some pre-test data before you expose your clients to an intervention. You expose them to the intervention, or they take part in the intervention, and then you collect some post-test data where you kind of compare the pre-test, where they were at the pre-test, to where they are at the post-test. That's more quantitative in nature. But if you wanted to extend your quantitative findings, you could also collect some focus group or interview data that can also help you to understand the effectiveness of that intervention as well. And so the intervention mixed methods design is just simply using more of a mixed methods approach to evaluate the effectiveness of an intervention. So we're not just looking at pre-post test data, but we're also adding on some kind of qualitative component that can help us to understand the effectiveness of that intervention from a qualitative standpoint. The social justice mixed methods approach involves, again, both the collection of quantitative and qualitative methods, but these methods are employed and these data are collected both quantitatively and qualitatively in order to yield a call for action to improve the plight of the marginalized. So in other words, the purpose within a social justice mixed methods approach, the purpose is not simply to just generate findings from quantitative and qualitative methods. The purpose in the end is to come out of all of that with some kind of call to action that helps to improve the plight of the oppressed or the marginalized. So it's really about how we couch our findings from this mixed methods work. It's really about what we do with those findings in the end. And in a social justice approach, what we do with those findings is we use those findings to drive action. That's really what it's about. It's nothing innately different in a social justice mixed methods approach it's just really the difference is how the findings are used and how we couch our findings. And again, as I mentioned, the findings are couched in such a way that it pushes people to action. It's a clear, concrete, in the end, once we've gathered all of our findings, in the end, the way in which we are formulating those findings is intentionally putting forth some concrete call to action. And it's with the expectation that there will be social change. Okay, so that's the main difference with the social justice mixed methods approaches. It's not anything that's innately special or different. It's just how we couch our findings and how we use those findings. If we're employing a social justice approach, we're more likely to present those findings in certain contexts and community-based contexts, or to policymakers or folks that are driving change in the community. And so that's really the key to more of a social justice approach. It's not just the findings in and of themselves, but what we do with those findings and the outcome of those findings that makes the difference when we are coming from a social justice standpoint. And finally, a multi-phased mixed methods approach involves conducting a longitudinal study that is composed of several mixed methods projects that are implemented in multiple phases, but all focus on a common objective. So in other words, what this means is that we, within this kind of approach, we have several mixed method studies that we are conducting simultaneously, and each of those studies can be at different phases of the mixed methods process, but all of them are a part of, all of the mixed method studies are a part of a larger research project. But even though they're separate mixed method studies that compose this larger research project, all of the studies within that project have a common objective. And so that's what a multi-phase mixed method study is. So we can have within this larger research project, we might have one mixed method study that is a concurrent or a convergent mixed methods study. We can have one study that's an exploratory sequential study, and we can have another study that's an explanatory sequential study. So all of these studies have different kinds of designs, but they're all a part of this larger project that has this common objective. And so that's pretty much what a multi-phase mixed method study is. It's just a big, huge research project that's composed of a number of different mixed method studies that all have a common objective that underlies all of them. So now let's talk a little bit about the reasons for using mixed methods. So 3 broad reasons. So there are times in which we conduct research methods, mixed methods in such a way where we use one set of methods to illustrate cases or provide numbers for the findings of the other set of methods. So in other words, we want to extend our main findings. And so I've done this in my own work, as I just mentioned, where I conduct the quantitative methods or the quantitative phase of the study, but I want to extend my quantitative findings. So I also collect qualitative data, because I want to be able to not only just collect quantitative data and have the numbers, but I want to be able to explain those numbers. So I want to be able to extend my quantitative findings. So that's one reason why we may conduct mixed methods. Another reason is to use one set of methods to initiate ideas or techniques that can later be pursued by the other set of methods. So generating research questions or techniques. So one example for this might be that we might start by collecting qualitative data that helps us to gain an in-depth understanding of a phenomena. And then we might want to follow that phenomena up. That might help us to generate more quantitatively oriented research questions. So once we've gotten an in-depth understanding of a particular phenomena, then that might help us to generate research questions for the next phase of the study, which might be more quantitative in nature. So sometimes we might use one method in order to give us ideas or help us to generate questions for another phase. And also, a final reason why we might use mixed methods is to see if two sets of findings from both methods corroborate with each other. So this normally happens when we are conducting a convergent design where we are employing both quantitative and qualitative methods simultaneously. And we want to see if what we find on the quantitative side of things matches what we find on the qualitative side. So this is corroboration. So when we want to see whether the two methods match up together and whether the finding that we have on one side confirms the finding that we have on the other side. And so we have two sets of findings from both methods, and we want to see if they align with each other. So that's another reason why we might conduct mixed methods as well. So here's a table that comes from your textbook that pretty much just reiterates what I've just said. And so you might want to take a look at this in your own time as well, just to help to solidify your understanding of some of the key reasons why we might employ mixed methods. And finally, here's a video that is called "What is Research Methods?" And it is with one of the biggest sort of gurus on research methods, which is John Cresswell. He's been in this field of mixed methods research for over 20 years, and many folks that do this kind of research defer to him and his work a lot of the time to really understand the inner workings of this particular method. And so it's a very short video where he kind of takes you through and explains what exactly mixed methods is and what this whole method entails. And so you might want to take a look at this video as well in your own time to get a bit more of an understanding of beyond what's in your text on exactly what this kind of method is all about. So in summary, we have in this video lecture discussed the differences between objectivity and subjectivity, the differences between quantitative and qualitative methods, also mixed methods of inquiry, types of mixed methods designs, 3 basic mixed methods designs, 3 advanced mixed methods designs, and finally, the reasons for using mixed methods designs. So now is the point at which I invite you to check for your understanding of these concepts. You can do this in one of 3 ways. You can either click on this survey here and complete it and click submit, or you can copy and paste the link on the right in your browser, or you can scan the QR code with your cell phone. I hope that this has been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next class.